Excuse me, could everyone please be seated?
All rise. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes. United States District Court for Western District of North Carolina is now sitting for ceremonial purposes. The Honorable Kenneth Bell, Judge of the United States District Court presiding. All persons having business before this court are admonished to draw near, and it shall be heard. God save these United States and this honorable court. Please be seated.
We were hoping and expecting to have Judge Edie Williams with us. Apparently she's gotten tied up on something, so it is still, in my mind, a joint session of the state and federal courts, and I'm going to resist the temptation to jump up from one chair to the other, in that I have no authority over the state courts of North Carolina. Today, we gather together in a joint session of the federal and state courts to recognize the service and the life of one of our number, Mr. Paul Jerome Polking. This memorial service is a time-honored tradition when the brothers and sisters of the bar pay homage to the life and times of one of their profession, of one who has shared this unique discipline that binds us together. Today, we recognize that life and those achievements as a matter of public record and for the sake of our historical corporate memory. The court will now recognize George Miller, Chair of the Memorials Committee, to tell you more about this time-honored tradition of the bar. You may.
Thank you, sir. Welcome. As Judge Bell said, my name is George Miller. I'm the chair of the Mecklenburg County Bar Memorials Committee, and it's really a great job. I love it. Several of our members of our committee are here today because it means so much to us. We've determined that we are probably the only bar in the United States that has a continuing tradition like this, and we've been doing this for over 70 years. So this means a lot to each of the members of the Mecklenburg County Bar. It means a lot to our institution as a whole. So we want to welcome the family and the friends of Mr. Polking, and I look forward to hearing what Mr. Raleigh Shoemaker has to say today. Mr. Shoemaker will be presenting a resolution for the court today, and after the memorial today, the minutes will reflect not only Mr. Shoemaker's resolution, but also all the comments, all the wonderful things that people might have to say today. So I look forward to hearing from all of you, and especially from Mr. Shoemaker. So may it please the court, I'd like to turn this proceeding over to Mr. Raleigh Shoemaker.
Mr. Shoemaker.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I take a moment to introduce the members of the family who
Yes,
are
please
seated?
do.
We have members of the Polking family here, and unfortunately, not everyone could be here today, but we have Christian and Jean Polking. We have Bob and Caroline Robertson. Now, Christian's the son, Caroline's a daughter. These are daughter-in-law and son-in-law. We have Joan, Paul's wife. We have Matthew Paul, and we have Jonathan and his wife, Stephanie. Unfortunately, son Patrick had a scheduling conflict and could not be with us today, but we are recording this and he may be able to see it on live stream. So we're feeling that he's here with us and we'll be eventually either seeing it now or we'll see it later. But I know I speak also for the family when I thank everyone for coming. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces from some time ago in my career. And so I know it means a lot to the family to see you here. May it please the court, the members of the Polking family and members of the bar and friends of Paul. On behalf of the Mecklenburg County Bar, I am honored and privileged to present this resolution and memorial honoring the life and memory of our beloved friend, Paul Jerome Polking. Paul was born in Breda, Iowa in 1937 and grew up on the Polking family farm. He was one of 7 children, undoubtedly growing up on a family farm helped instill in Paul from an early age a strong work ethic that all of us saw him exhibit throughout his entire life. In 1955, Paul headed to South Bend, Indiana to attend Notre Dame, where he became a lifelong fan of the Fighting Irish. After earning a Bachelor of Science degree from Notre Dame in 1959, Paul joined the U.S. Navy as a lieutenant junior grade and served in the Navy until 1963. After his tour in the Navy, Paul returned to Notre Dame to get his law degree, graduating in 1966 and thus becoming a full-fledged double domer of Notre Dame. As a double domer of Notre Dame, I think it's fair to say that part of Paul's heart always remained in South Bend because he returned frequently to the campus to volunteer his time to assist the law school in an advisory role and to attend Irish football games. I always knew that I could get a big smile out of Paul over lunch when I would ask him in late summer of every year which Irish football games he was planning to attend in the upcoming season. And those smiles got even bigger as he began to have children and grandchildren attending Notre Dame and its sister school, St. Mary's College, which would turn game days into tailgating family affairs. After graduating from Notre Dame Law School, Paul accepted a position in the Office of the Comptroller of Currency in Washington, which is the federal agency that regulates national banks. That proved to be a significant springboard for Paul's career as a bank regulatory lawyer. But more importantly, it was in Washington that Paul first met his future wife, Joan, who was a nursing student at Catholic University and who instantly became the true love of his life. During their 54-year marriage, Paul and Joan were blessed to have 5 beautiful children and 20 grandchildren. Despite his demanding career, Paul always managed to be very active in the lives of his children, in the youth athletic teams, and coached many of them over the years. Even when Paul was not coaching a team, Paul and Joan always attended as many of the children and grandchildren's athletic games as possible. In 1970, Paul and Joan were recruited to move to Charlotte so that Paul could accept a position as the second member of the legal department of what was then a small Southern bank that had recently reorganized itself as a bank holding company and changed its name to NCNB Corporation. The decision by Paul and Joan to take a leap of faith and move into Charlotte to join the bank proved to be one of their best life decisions, because over the next 30 years, Paul enjoyed an immensely rewarding career with the bank, during which he served from 1988 until his retirement as general counsel of the bank, while the legendary Hugh McCall was serving as CEO of the bank. When Paul joined the bank in 1970, its assets were around $1 billion. When Paul retired more than 30 years later, the assets of the bank had increased to $600 billion. How Hugh McCall, Paul, and the other members of the management team at the bank were able to achieve that level of growth with the accompanying expansion geographically of the bank's footprint has been the subject of a number of books. Suffice it to say, it is one of the greatest stories in the history of banking in the United States. I was very blessed to have a front row seat observing Paul's illustrious career, because in 1970, my wife and I also came to Charlotte so that I could accept a position with the legacy Kennedy Covington firm. I was fortunate to meet Paul early on because our firm was doing some legal work for the bank. As a result, I was blessed to have and enjoy both a professional and personal relationship with Paul that extended for more than 50 years. While Paul's career accomplishments at the bank were legion, there were three, which I refer to as Paul's legal career trifecta, that particularly stood out to me and others. The first component of the trifecta occurred in the early 1980s at a time when the bank was anxious to expand its operations outside North Carolina. At that time, the concept of interstate banking was controversial, since most banks wanted to protect their home turf. However, in the early 1980s, Paul became a central figure in the development of a legal strategy for the bank that would enable the bank to expand in the state of Florida using the provisions of an existing Florida law, which Paul astutely interpreted to permit a business unit in Florida that the bank had owned for approximately 10 years to become a permissible acquirer of a Florida bank. While that position was contested on several fronts, Paul's strategy was ultimately vindicated by the approval of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. That approval in turn led to NCNB National Bank of Florida becoming one of the biggest banks in Florida within several years. By the mid-1980s, more permissive interstate banking laws had passed in Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland, which ultimately led to the bank's expansion into those states through acquisition of large institutions headquartered in those states. The second component of what I consider to be Paul's banking law career trifecta occurred in 1988, when Hugh McCall, Paul, and a team of advisors, led principally by a brilliant tax lawyer from Charlotte named Frank Blanchfield, were successful in structuring a transaction to take over the failed banks owned by two Texas-based bank holding companies in partnership with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This transaction was later described in an article in the New York Times as the banking deal of the 20th century. Not only did this transaction vault the bank into the state of Texas, but it also resulted in the bank growing significantly in size from approximately $20 billion in assets in 1987 to around $70 billion in assets by the end of 1991. The third component of the career trifecta for Paul occurred approximately 10 years later, after the Texas transaction, when Hugh McCall, Paul, Frank Blanchfield, and other advisors undertook in 1998 to structure and gain approval of a transaction that many thought could never be accomplished by the bank, which was then known as Nations Bank. But it acquired the San Francisco headquartered Bank of America, then leading to the bank changing its own name to the iconic Bank of America name that is currently used, and completing the expansion of the bank's geographic footprint from its roots in North Carolina all the way to California and the rest of the Pacific coast. As a result of Paul's keen intellect and leadership skill, during his tenure as general counsel of the bank, Paul was able to attract and retain a number of outstanding lawyers to work with him in the legal department, many of whom went on to have outstanding legal careers of their own, and many of whom are in this courtroom. The legal department grew and thrived under Paul's leadership, becoming one of the largest corporate law departments, and Paul was a wonderful mentor to younger colleagues throughout his career. Despite all the significant career accomplishments as a lawyer, Paul always remained the same level-headed, modest, and humble person that I had the good fortune to meet in 1970. He never claimed any singular credit or sought to put the spotlight on himself. Instead, he always credited others for these successes, often referring to how fortunate he was to be on a great team that accomplished these transformative results for the bank under the leadership of Hugh McCall. Paul confirmed over and over during his career and during his retirement years that in addition to being a brilliant lawyer, he was an even better human being, including as a husband to Joan, a father to their 5 children, a grandfather to their 20 grandchildren, and a trusted friend of so many people. Paul was also a generous donor with Joan of time and talents to numerous civic, educational, and religious organizations. In addition to Notre Dame Law School, these included the Catholic schools of Mecklenburg County, Belmont Abbey College, St. Mary's College, the UNC Law School Banking Law Institute, and Holy Angels. Paul also served the parish of St. Vincent de Paul in numerous roles, and he was a member of the Order of Malta, Legatus, and Knights of Columbus. In conclusion, Paul Polking was an exemplary lawyer throughout his career and an exemplary human being throughout his life. He was a wonderful role model for his children and grandchildren to observe and learn what it means to lead a life of faith, humility, integrity, and in service to others. His was a life truly well lived, and I consider my professional relationship and my personal friendship with Paul to be one of the great blessings of my life. If it please the court, with love and respect for Paul Jerome Polking, on behalf of the Mecklenburg Bar, I move that when the court adjourns this session, it do so in memory and out of respect for Paul Jerome Polking. 2, that the original of this resolution and memorial be received by the court and inscribed in its minutes. And 3, that copies of this resolution and memorial be made available to Joan Polking, his widow, and other members of the family.
That motion is happily granted.
Thank you.
It is further part of the tradition of these that we invite any who would like to speak about Paul to come to the podium. Looking around the courtroom, I see a great many people who are not known for their timidity and hesitancy to speak. So if there are any who would like to speak during this memorial, please come forward.
This district that I asked that I be allowed to address.
We welcome you anyway.
My name is Patty O'Hara, and I'm recently retired from 43 years on the faculty of Notre Dame Law School. And I have known Paul and Joan for 30 of those years. And so it's a real privilege for me to be here today and offer a remembrance with respect to Paul. I'm very grateful to the Mecklenburg County Bar Association and to the United States District Court for Charlotte and Fourth Circuit for providing me this opportunity. I've only been to Charlotte 3 times in my life, and those 3 times were in the last 25 years, and each one of them is in connection with something that was honoring Paul. So the first was in 2004, when I think I came down for my iPhone is only 2007 forward, so I couldn't confirm this on the calendar, but I'm pretty sure that it was an event hosted by the local Notre Dame Club of Charlotte in conjunction with the Banking Laws Institute's honoring of Paul in 2004 when he retired. The second was about 10 years later when Paul's 5 children successfully pulled off a surprise party for their 45th wedding anniversary, and I was part of the surprise. And the third is today. And I really am grateful to you for providing this occasion, because I was not able to come to the funeral in December. And I promised Joan that I would come down separately for something, and this was the ideal something. But what struck me as I was thinking about offering these remembrances is that those 3 trips and those 3 occasions capture what I think of as the 3 pillars of Paul's life. The first, his professional life at the time of his retirement. The second, his family and friends, which was celebrated his anniversary. And I'm going to substitute, with all due respect for the First Amendment and separation of church and state, that because I could not be at the funeral mass, I'm counting this as the occasion in which I can also say a few words about his life as a man of deep faith. So first, with respect to his professional life, we've already heard a brilliant summary of his professional life. We at Notre Dame claim him as a legend. And we did so for many of the reasons that you recounted in the trifecta. But it really began with the fact that he was member of a legendary class, the class of '66 from the law school. Paul came to Notre Dame, as you heard, from Iowa as an undergraduate, graduating in '59, and then came back after his Navy service to the law school. These were the years that Notre Dame was still all male. Other than in football, it was not really a nationally recognized university. The law school was small, and there were only 58 members in his all-male class. But he was legendary before he ever hit banking, simply for having survived Notre Dame Law School in that period of time. Because in that period of time, there was a legendary dean that Father Hesburgh had hired from the practicing bar, not from the academy, in order to introduce rigor into the law school so that it could be elevated to a national level. His name was Dean O'Mara. I was sometimes called the link between Dean O'Mara and Dean O'Hara, because the intervening dean of 24 years was David Link. But Dean O'Mara, at the appointment in which he was hired by Father Hesburgh, and I know this because Father Hesburgh outlived him and gave his eulogy, Dean O'Mara said to him, "Father Hesburgh, if you offer me this job, I will make your life a living hell." There was then a pause in Father Hesburgh's delivery of the eulogy, in which Father Hesburgh simply said, "Joe O'Mara was a man of his word." And so when I say that Paul's professional life began by surviving Joe O'Mara, I mean it literally, because the reason there were only 58 in his graduating class is he had a history of attriting those that he did not think were worthy to be lawyers. And the way he accomplished that, so for those of you that are lawyers in the room, every year law students took comprehensive final exams. So first semester, first year, it was simply on those courses you had taken. But for spring semester of your 3rd year of law school, you received a packet of exam questions that were not labeled conflicts, civil procedure, contracts. They were comprehensive exams, and you could be examined on anything, on any course for the 3 years of law school. And if you didn't pass spring semester 3L, you were out. That was it. So he was a survivor, and that class has become legendary because even in those days where they hailed from a modest law school, not yet as where we quite are today, that class produced attorneys who went on to become lawyers and managing partners at 3 of the big 50 law firms in the country, a still sitting Court of Appeals judge, a gentleman who ran USAID, and someone who is still a professor at University of Maine Law School, and Paul. So I'm grateful for the instruction on banking law as to exactly why he was legendary. I've read the Banking Institute, and I'd like to think that in that very first transaction in Lakeland, Florida, where he went to NCNB's trust company, which was only depository and not a commercial banking, that he found the plan, the joints to make that possible because of Dean O'Mara and the comprehensive exams from Notre Dame Law School. But as you heard, he joined a small bank with national in its name because it was federally chartered, and together with others took it to being the national force that it is today. So from being the number 2 person in the legal department when he retired in 2004, there were 240 lawyers in the Bank of America legal department in 17 different cities in the country. And I think it's fair to say that everybody recognizes Charlotte as being the largest banking commercial city in the United States, save possibly New York, where one of his sons practices law. And my expertise in the law is securities regulations. So geek that I am, I went and pulled up the 8K that he had to file in 1998 for the merger of Bank of America and Nations Bank. And I wanted to see, and indeed it's signed by Paul J. Polking as Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the new Bank of America. He was the General Counsel who survived in the process and continued to serve for 6 years. So we take great pride in the quality of Paul's lawyering here in North Carolina. But to Paul, it was his role as a devoted husband, as a father, and as a grandfather of 20 and 5 children with a lot of degrees from Notre Dame and his daughter from St. Mary's. 3 of them law degrees. 3 of his sons went on to be lawyers, and he's equally proud of the son with an MBA. All 3 of those sons decided to go to law school at different points in time, such that they all graduated in 2004. They had to go to 3 law school graduations at NYU, North Carolina, and Notre Dame. With respect to those sons. He was so proud at every Law Advisory Council meeting he attended, and he attended all of them. He served 4 different deans. He spoke almost exclusively, except for Notre Dame football, about the accomplishments of his children and his grandchildren. So in his second event, it was really wonderful for me to be able to come down for the surprise party that his children gave him on that occasion and hear him feted by so many members of the local community and by his family and friends, because that was the role that he truly treasured. We know that he was a great benefactor here in the city of Charlotte and to the church. Those organizations that were named, Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, Legatus, are not things that come to you just from words. They come from actions and from tremendous generosity, and we're proud of that as well. But I'd like to talk just a little bit about Paul's role as a man of faith. And in that way, I'm going to talk mostly about the service that he provided to Notre Dame. As I mentioned, he served 4 different deans, including me. And I can think of 3 anecdotes in which the kind of servant leadership that you saw here in the Charlotte community, we were the beneficiaries of at Notre Dame. The first was at the time of my appointment. I did 10 years as dean, and I was appointed in the fall of '99. And the Law Advisory Council was not happy about the appointment. They expressed it as a process problem. They didn't feel they had been adequately consulted. I was the first woman that was dean of the law school. So perhaps some senior members were thinking, gosh, it's only been less than 30 years since we became a coeducational institution. What's this all about? So you might expect that I was a little nervous walking into my initial meeting of the Law Advisory Council, but I had some protectors. There were some women on the board that were young graduates whom I had taught. And when we came to the meeting room, which was a little bit like this, those 5 were in the front row, like the offensive line, and they were ready to bounce, which may not have been very helpful. But Paul, as Paul always would be, since he was humble and self-effacing and more on the quiet side, was in the middle of the room, and Paul had done all his work prior to the meeting. There was not a peep out of anybody on the Law Advisory Council at my first meeting, and I received a wonderful welcome, and it was because of all the work that Paul had done in the background before the meeting ever got off the ground. The second was that after I had been dean for 5 years, it was time to change the chair of the Law Advisory Council. And so at the time, the composition of the council was made up of many senior members who had been appointed by my predecessor, who had been, as I said, dean for 24 years, and then a handful of new appointments that had been made in my first 5 years. And I felt that we needed somebody from the senior leadership ranks, but it needed to be somebody that could bridge senior and junior. The year, once again, was 2004. 3 law school graduations, his retirement, and I called him and asked him to be chair of the Law Advisory Council because I had taken some informal soundings from both senior members and junior members. There was only one name that came up as the person that could do that job and be that bridge, and it was Paul. So I called Paul and put on my best case for why he should assume chair of the Law Advisory Council, and my pitch was greeted with complete silence. Now, Paul was a man of few words, so I didn't take offense at the silence. I did wonder where the conversation was going. And so he said, Patty, I just retired from Bank of America. I promised Joan that we could travel, and we could travel to someplace other than South Bend, Indiana. And I just got strong-armed into joining the Board of Trustees of Belmont Abbey, and that's going to take a lot of time. I just don't think I'm the man for the job right now. Does it really have to be me? And he brings up some other names. And I said, Paul, I'm telling you, one name. You and Johnny Lujak, consensus All-Americans. It's got to be you. And so he said that he would agree to do it and he would do his best. And I said I would try to ask him as little as possible. One of the two of us kept our word. I suspect you know which one cheated. Because only a year later, we were in the middle of a capital campaign for a expansion that doubled the size of the law school. And it involved gutting our existing building and building a new building, connecting them with a beautiful arch. And if you ever come for a home game, the band marches under the arch to the football stadium. And the project was $58.6 million, and we had 45. And we had only a year to raise the balance of the 13 million that we needed, or we would lose our spot in the construction queue. And I had not asked anybody on the Law Advisory Council for a gift towards the building because the Law Advisory Council was an important source for us for scholarships, for loan forgiveness, for chaired professorships, for a lot of other programming. But it was clear to me that having tapped everybody that we had for the major anchor gifts, that I was going to have to go to the council. And so I picked up the phone and I called Paul. And I said, Paul, I know that you and Joan do not care about bricks and mortar. I don't know this for a fact, but I'll be surprised if the Polking name is on any big building in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's not their style. On the other hand, we have every year multiple students in each of our class that are Polking fellows because of their contributions to financial aid. But Paul knew the significance of this building. We were living in a building that had been built for a faculty of 5 and for a student body of 100. And we were a faculty of 30 with a student body of 550. So we were jammed. And even though it wasn't his personal priority, as is true all of his life, Paul's an institution builder. And so he and Joan generously agreed to make a leadership gift for one of our large classrooms. And as soon as he made his gift, every other person on the law council stepped up and we closed the gap. Which brings me to the last anecdote, which is the dedication of the building. When the building was completed and we had the dedication ceremony, I walked Paul and Joan to the classroom, big plaque for the Polking family classroom, and they said, yeah, that's very nice. They clearly weren't very excited about it, but they had done their part. And then the last place on the tour was the law school chapel. And we came into the law school chapel, and it has 5 stained glass windows, and 4 of them had been dedicated in the memory of a particular priest that had been on the law faculty by his students. But the last one was in front of the tabernacle, and it was blocked, so we didn't seek funding for that one. And this is where Joan comes into the story. Joan says, why isn't the last window named? And I said, well, it's blocked. We really didn't think anybody would want that one. And she says to Paul, I'd much rather have a stained glass window behind the Eucharist than a classroom. Can you make that happen? And Paul said to me, Patty, can you make that happen? I said, well, Paul, it's a lot less money than what you gave for the classroom. And Joan says, who cares? It's right next to the Eucharist. So today you will find no classroom that has Paul Polking and Joan's name on it, but right to the stained glass window, blocked, unlike all the other name plaques, hidden, just like they do all of their goodness, you will find the Paul and Joan Polking window in the Notre Dame Law School. So we are so proud of Paul for all of the reasons that you articulated. But at Notre Dame, we really take pride in trying to develop people that are people not just of the mind, but of the heart and the soul. And I can't think of anybody that is a better exemplar of that in his role as a lawyer, in his role as a family man, and his role as a person of faith than Paul Polking. We will miss him sorely. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Well, I'm Father Dennis Kuhn, priest of the Diocese of Charlotte here. I've known the Polkings since 1985. Now, I'm not an attorney, and I've kept myself out of the court for many years, and so this is the first time I've ever had a microphone. And since I'm not an attorney, I shall be brief. But I've known the Polkings from St. Anne's Church in Charlotte since 1985. I went to high school with most of the Polking kids because I was the chaplain at Charlotte Catholic High School during those years when they were students in high school. And my focus to the moment is just to talk about the devotion of this man. His faith has been mentioned, and I'll talk about devotion to his family, devotion to his work, his career, but his devotion as a man of faith. And I feel, as 50 years a priest, I feel I have the credentials to attest to his devotion to his faith. Paul and I wish to share phone calls, but also emails on a weekly basis. In his retirement, he became more of a man of prayer than you might imagine. I'm sure he prayed when he was, general counsel and all the things that he did, but he became a man of prayer, realizing there was a spiritual life, not just the career, how to make things happen, but he was a man of faith and a man of prayer. And so I attest, Your Honor, to his greatness and his devotion, if it pleased the court. He is a man, the moment in our faith tells us this, that he's praying for us. And we honor him and we love him, and I miss him. He's a dear friend, a good man, a tremendously good man. Love you all. Thank you.
The podium is open for any who would like to speak. Yes, sir, Mr. Polking.
May it please the court. I'm not a litigator, Your Honor, so please forgive my procedural shortcomings. As a transactional lawyer, my goal is to stay out of the court. Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the bar, friends, and family. My name is Paul Matthew Polking, and I am the third of Paul's and Joan's 5 children. My dad's journey from Iowa to South Bend to the Navy, back to South Bend, to Washington, and ultimately to Charlotte is widely known. His professional accomplishments at the Comptroller of the Currency and at the bank, and the personal accolades from a storied career are widely known and the subject of books and law review articles. His selfless service and unwavering commitment to the church, charity, and his alma mater are widely known. What may not be widely known is the importance to Dad of the responsibilities of a lawyer. The professionalism and respect towards opposing counsel, the zealous advocacy of the client, the respect of the judicial system, the ethical standards of the bar, and the work ethic of a successful practitioner. These are just some of the characteristics and qualities that I admired about my dad and that drew me to pursue a career as a lawyer. And these are the memories of Dad that I hold near to me and that I continue to draw on daily as I tackle the challenges in my career as a lawyer. I would often call my dad on my commute home after the dust had settled from a day at the office. We would talk about work, but only for a minute or two. He would quickly move on to ask about Tara and our daughters, Juliet and Valencia, 2 of his 21 cherished grandchildren. I say 21 because there's one on the way. We would talk Dodgers, golf, Villanova basketball, and of course the Irish. Through it all, I learned a lot about life, but also about the legal profession we shared. Months after his passing, I often find myself on my commute asking Siri to call Dad, only to recall that God doesn't allow cell phones in heaven. So instead of a live conversation, I spend a few minutes of my drive recalling our prior conversations and drawing from the past advice to apply to the facts of the day. I'm grateful that I always have the memories and the ability to draw on the past conversations with and the lessons from my dad. As Mr. Shoemaker remarked earlier, Dad was always the first to recognize the entire team. So before I conclude, I want to recognize a few people on behalf of him. There are countless numbers of people that my dad would thank for making it possible for him to achieve the professional success he achieved. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but instead a list of some of the people with whom I had the pleasure of interacting over the years of my dad's career. Of course, his trusted personal lawyer and confidant, Mr. Shoemaker, who also represented the bank for many years. Betty McCarty, Dad's assistant for much of his career at the bank. She kept Dad, and in many respects, our entire family, organized and prepared. Mr. McCall, for the trust he placed in Dad throughout the years, and most importantly, through all of the mergers and consolidations. The many colleagues in the legal department, including Richard Kim and Jerry Hurst, who are here today. And another one, Carmen Pagano. Another of my dad's colleagues in the legal department at the bank, and one of his dearest friends, who became a dear friend and confidant of my own. God rest his soul. And last but not least, Dad's staunchest supporter and advocate, my mom, Joan. Thank you, Your Honor.
Yeah.
May I address the audience?
You may.
May it please the court. Raleigh and others have eloquently described the contributions of my father to the legal system, especially as it relates to his advocacy and influence in banking law. As you might expect, my relationship with him, being that of a father and son, also involved various rules and regulations. They rarely connected to banking law. The law was, however, an essential connection through our relationship and his life. I'd like to focus on two aspects of this connection that are a little different than the legal work for which he was most known. First, my dad, being a man of few words, as we all know, never spoke to us about becoming lawyers or pushed us to be lawyers. When I graduated from college, I told him law school was most assuredly not part of my future plan. Naturally, 6 years later, I went to law school. Not only did I join the legal profession with my dad standing next to me as my sponsor at my swearing in, my practice for the majority of my legal career is that of in-house counsel, as was his. I'm convinced my brothers and I followed our paths in the legal profession because it wasn't what he said, but rather what he did that showed us the dignity of the legal profession. My dad was proud to be a lawyer, loved his job, thinking of it as a calling. He believed that the law is a noble profession, and that was reflected in his daily life. The second legal connection is more directly personal. As most of you probably know, there are occasions where courts create a legal fiction. That is, they create a fact to allow for the operation of a legal rule. In this instance, the legal fiction the court created was the process for my mom and dad to adopt me and have a birth certificate issued naming me as their child. My dad's full and willing suspension of disbelief in accepting this legal fiction was so complete that my dad occasionally forgot I was adopted. In an interesting connection to today, my parents worked with Judge Potter prior to his being seated on the federal bench here in this courthouse to finalize the adoption papers. My dad's relationship with me was intertwined with the law from the very beginning. It grew over the years with his example as a father and provider, always exemplifying the dignity of the legal profession. And today it's my hope that I can continue to grow as the kind of lawyer and man he expected me to be. Thank you.
Seeing no other, oh, there we go. It does.
My name is Jerry Hurst. I recently retired from another bank as their general counsel. But I had the privilege of working with Paul Polking from 1988 to 2004. I didn't know it at the time, but similar to Paul, I came to Charlotte from Washington, D.C. I worked at the Federal Reserve Board as a lawyer. And I don't have a whole lot to add to the comments that have been made before me by Raleigh and Patty and others. But I just wanted to say that, you know, everything that was said is an understatement. That, you know, Paul was the greatest mentor, boss, leader, friend that one could ever hope for. And, you know, everything that happened professionally for me and in many other ways from 1988 to today is because of Paul Polking. And Paul Polking had the most incredible mind and integrity and everything that was said. And going to the comment made a moment ago that he was a man of few words, but he led by example. And you learned by what he did and watching him. And if I may just tell a story about Paul, you know, Paul gave me a ride down to Iowa for one of the first, maybe they had other offsites before the law group, but it was the first one that I went to, a law group. And so Paul gave me a ride. I was riding with Paul, and it was a Saturday afternoon because our offsite was going to start on Sunday. And we're driving down through some place in South Carolina, and Paul is looking at his watch. And Paul tells me that we're going to have to stop along the way. And we got off the interstate driving to Iowa, and we went down some country roads, and Paul found a small Catholic church on some little road off of the main road, some secondary road that as I recall, I don't even know that it was a 2-lane road. But Paul was going to attend services on this Saturday evening. And having grown up a Baptist, it was a little bit foreign to me, you know, the church on a Saturday evening. But we stopped and we went to service. He took me along. But there were many other stories that I won't take your time on, where Paul, by his actions and the way he lived his life, taught me more than I, you know, could ever ask for or expect. And I just want to say that, you know, all of us should remember Paul and the things that he taught us by his actions and everything, and try to be just a little bit like Paul every day, because he did so much for me. And I just want to thank the Polking family for sharing him and say thank you and God bless.
Anyone else? Dr. Thierfelter. You may.
Well, I don't have any prepared remarks. As I came in the room, Joan said, well, you can speak. And I thought, okay. And everything's been said, I agree, is understatement. And I almost can't add to it. But the two things I thought, and the reason I just came up now, was for two reasons. First, I will just tell you that as a married couple, and in a world today where marriage is so under attack, Joan and Paul's marriage is an inspiration to the institution. They have lived a holy, blessed, loving marriage, and like Paul, Joan also lives by example and by what she does. And it's been I'm just so grateful to have known both of them. And I think Paul, he was on our board of trustees and his term was up. And I thought he came into the room thinking we were going to thank him for his service. And we said, well, now we want you to be chair of the board of trustees. And Paul, being quiet, sat there and kind of just stared. And he agreed because he knew the need was great. and it was something that he took on. And I come back to the marriage because I really believe that in him taking that on, you took it on with him. And it was the two of you together that got Belmont Abbey College through some very challenging times. And I'm just very grateful and just wanted to put it on the record that both myself and Mary and all of us and Belmont Abbey Colleges are so grateful for Joan and Paul Polking.
Every time I think we're through, we're not. Anyone else like to speak? Well, it's been a privilege to preside over this proceeding. I do want to tell one story. It's hearsay, so yeah, what its reliability is, I don't know. But my wife, Gail, told me a story I think she got from Joan not long after Paul's retirement. Of course, Paul was always busy, always organizing, always taking care of things. The way it was told to me, one morning early in his retirement, Joan came into the kitchen and saw him staring at open cabinet doors and opining how things could be organized better, which I think got a reaction from Joan as to roles and that she had been able to handle it just fine for a good number of years and did not necessarily need his input. And I think that spoke well of their marriage, as Dr. Thierfelter just said. When we adjourn this memorial proceeding, there will be a reception on the terrace of the courthouse on the 6th floor. So you can just take the same elevators that you used to get here, and you'll be able to see the terrace when you, I think the doors will be open by the court security officers, and we welcome you to that reception. And also, just before we got started, Joan asked if I would allow her to speak when we started winding down, and federal judge or not, I have a hard time saying no to Joan. So Joan, if you would like to say something. The court orders that the comments presented at this hour be spread upon the minutes of this court and filed with copies presented to the family of our departed brother at the bar. The court also requests, but does not order, that the judges of the Mecklenburg County Superior Court ordered that the comments of this hour be spread upon the minutes of the state court and filed with the clerk of court for Mecklenburg County. The court orders that the U.S. Marshal adjourn this joint memorial session of the court in memory and out of respect for Mr. Paul Polking. Fare thee well, colleague, and Godspeed.
All rise. Oh, yes, oh, yes. Memorial session of the United States District Court, the Western District of North Carolina is adjourned. Memory of, out of respect for Paul Polking.
I've never used the gavel before, but that means you can go.